Good morning, everyone. I am McKinney Chisholm Straker, serving as the current executive director of the New York State Community Commission on Reparations Remedies. Thank you all for joining today's hearing. I'm introducing our hearing from the ancestral lands of the Lenape Delaware Nation that was removed from these lands and forced to what is presently called Oklahoma. I honor and am grateful for the Lenape Delaware's enduring connection to this land and recognize the ongoing struggles of all Indigenous nations for sovereignty and justice. The story of Black New Yorkers begins and is intertwined with the story of Native nations here first and still. Today's hearing aims to gather insights and testimonies on matters related to the New York State Community Commission on Reparations Remedies, especially on the topics of historically Black neighborhoods and governmental displacement. But this hearing itself is, in and of itself, a part of reparations work. Truth-seeking and truth-telling is a part of satisfaction, one of the 5 forms of reparations under the United Nations legal framework. We do this work to honor and call out the suffering and pain of enslaved Black New Yorkers and the structural trauma that Black New Yorkers faced and continue to face due to anti-Black policies and structures. The agenda today includes a presentation from a content expert, time for question and answers, and then testimony from members of New York State public. Thank you all for maintaining a respectful environment that fosters constructive dialogue. For those who wish to speak during the public testimony portions, if you did not already indicate your intention to give testimony when you registered for the event, please privately message our interim operations manager, Ms. Erica Rowe Owen, now. Thank you. Briefly, I'll just share about this commission to remind everyone of the commission's purpose and goals. Contrary to what many assume, slavery was deeply entrenched in New York's history. In 1626, the Dutch first brought enslaved Africans to this Lenape, Delaware territory called Mannahatta. The Dutch called it New Amsterdam. Today, we call it, after its Lenape name, Manhattan. By the early 18th century, New York State had become the largest enslaving colony in the North, with 40% of white households enslaving Black relatives. In 1711, a slave market was established at the foot of Wall Street, at what is now the intersection of Wall and Water Streets. This market, in which Native and Black people were sold, remained active for decades, playing a central role in New York City's economy. Enslavement wasn't just a Southern institution, it was foundational to New York State's development. This is an excerpt from the 1800 census in New York State, illustrating the pervasiveness of slavery in this northern state. In 1799, New York passed legislation for gradual abolition. Abolition wasn't fully implemented in New York until 1827. This census document shows how New York counted enslaved persons under the 3/5 clause of the Constitution, which enhanced Southern political power, and is one example of the North's continued complicity in the institution of slavery. This slide shows an 1863 Thomas Nast illustration from Harper's Weekly depicting the horrors of slavery contrasted with the aspirational visions of freedom, including payment for work, public education, and home ownership. These were dreams that many formerly enslaved people held, but the reality of post-emancipation USA falls short. Reparations are about bringing the vision of communal abundance to fruition. At the federal level, H.R. 40, which would establish a national commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans, was first introduced in 1989 by Representative John Conyers, Jr., and has been reintroduced to Congress every year since without passage. California became the first state to establish a reparations task force in 2020, with their final report issued to the California legislature on the 29th of June in 2023. At the time that this 2024 map was created, reparations actions had been established in 11 states and 22 localities across the United States. That number is growing. New York is the second state to take up this mantle. New York State's Community Commission on Reparations Remedies was established via legislation signed by Governor Hochul on the 19th of December, 2023. The bill was sponsored by Assemblymember Michael Salages and Senator James Sanders, Jr. This commission is tasked with examining the legacy of slavery, subsequent discrimination, and their continuing impacts, and developing recommendations for appropriate remedies. To be clear, this commission does not enact reparative policies, nor does it provide payments as compensation or restitution. This commission will make recommendations to elected officials that New Yorkers have chosen. The elected officials of New York State are the ones who will decide which reparative recommendations to advance. The next two slides, this slide and the next slide, highlight what harms the commission is legislated to examine. Specifically, the commission is charged with examining slavery, the history of enslavement in New York, and continued policies of anti-Black structural racism and its impacts. The commission is then mandated to recommend specific recommendations for these harms. Folks can look up S1163A online and spend more time with the law, and it's also on the commission's website. The commission consists of 9 appointed commissioners and a dedicated team, with Erica Rowe Owen as interim operations manager, Jesse Adwar as executive commission assistant, Stuart Mitchell III as parliamentarian, Words Warriors as the communications team, policy studies associates for the historian and policy analysis teams, and me, McKinney Chisholm Straker, presently serving as executive director, with my time with the commission wrapping up in the next couple weeks. The commission's official website is ny.gov/reparations, and you can submit inquiries or written testimony by email to reparationscommission@reparations.ny.gov. The commission holds both business meetings and public hearings. Business meetings focus on the internal matters and commission work, while public hearings like today's event are specifically designed to gather community input. The commission welcomes public participation not only through in-person testimony, but also through written submissions. So even if you can't attend a meeting or a hearing, you can submit your comments to the email address on the website and listed here. There are many other ways for New Yorkers to engage with the commission's work beyond attending hearings. You can host community forums, provide testimony as discussed, submit recommendations via email, and engage in dialogues about reparations in your community. The commission is seeking input on what reparations might look like in New York State. This could include addressing inequities in housing, education, healthcare, the climate crisis, the criminal legal system, investing in Black-owned businesses, and direct financial compensation. The commission welcomes all suggestions for remedying the harms of slavery and subsequent anti-Black structural discrimination. Presently, the commission is evaluating received proposals for general counsel, economist, and public education coordinator teams, as well as the full-time operations manager to enable the commission's capacity to meet its mandate. The commission is also currently accepting proposals for a new executive director, so please apply or spread the word. And please watch the website for additional positions as they become available. Before I introduce our educational speaker, please remember that if you have questions during the presentation, you should place them into the Q&A. You'll be called on in the order in which questions were entered into the chat. You'll note that the chat only goes to the hosts. It is not to the general public. And as this is a public hearing, please be prepared to come off of mute and have your camera on if you intend to ask questions. So when you hear your name, you'll be invited to unmute and turn your camera on. That being said, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Marquise Taylor from the Department of History at Northwestern University. Mr. Taylor is a fifth-year history PhD candidate at Northwestern. In 2023 and 2024, he was awarded a Mellon Public History Postdoctoral Fellowship, where he worked for the Tenement Museum in New York City. Mr. Taylor served as lead researcher for the museum's latest permanent exhibit, Union of Hope, 1869, which centers the experiences of Black people living in Civil War-era New York. His expertise in Black New York history makes him an invaluable voice for our work today. Mr. Taylor, I will stop sharing, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, McKinney, for that introduction. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be with you all here today. So I'm going to just take a moment really quickly to share my screen so we can get started. Okay. Okay. So again, good morning, everyone. My name is Marquise Taylor, and I'm a history PhD candidate at Northwestern University in Chicago, Illinois. But despite the fact that I attend school in Chicago, I am a lifelong New Yorker. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Both my parents are New Yorkers as well as their parents. I am the descendant of Black migrants from the American South and the Caribbean who ultimately left their communities and countries for New York in pursuit of bettering their own lives and the lives of their children and grandchildren. And so I share these details about myself really briefly because it's an honor and a privilege to speak before the New York State Commission on Reparations about the limitations of this city and how it's wielded its hand or remained complacent in the forced migration of Black New Yorkers out of their homes and communities during the 19th century. And so today we'll discuss Lower Manhattan's Eighth Ward and the communities that Black New Yorkers built before, during, and after the Civil War, up until the end of the 19th century, and explore how race and racism shaped the development of of our racially stratified city today. And so to get us started, I'll play a video from Gina Manuel, a Black New Yorker whose family goes back in this city to the 1700s.
March 6, 1989. Ms. Ruth J. Abram, curator, the Tenement Museum, 97 Orchard Street, New York, New York. Dear Ms. Abram, I am a longtime listener at WNYCAM radio. What a delight as an old New Yorker to hear that at last the history of my family and my old New York will be preserved. After hearing that the records in the old Customs House and Boss Tweed's building were either lost to us or already lost to us, I am overjoyed to hear of your work and that of your group. Having said that, I would like to relate a few facts. My ancestors go back in this city as far as oral history goes, to the 1700s. I and my mother, uncles, and cousins remember that grandmother and great-grandmother and father were dwellers in the tenements of old New York City and lived on Minetta Lane, Prince Street. The men worked at the old South Street Seaport, and they attended the St. Patrick's Church. Some were born in St. Joseph Church's infirmary. They related to us how water came in by wagon from upstate. They related how the department stores, Macy's and others, were downtown. We lived in tenements with gas lights and coal stoves. They were African Americans, and their names were Lawrence, Nolan, and Downing. They lived in the tenements on the old Bowery and related to us about the old Tong gangs and how the first Catholic church, they were Catholics, was St. Anthony's in the village. They were pushed out by the new immigrants in the beginning of the century and moved from the Lower East Side to Hell's Kitchen, Chelsea, the Tenderloin, West 40s, and finally to the West 50s, which was called Old San Juan Hill. Grandpa got out the vote for Tammany. So when you are planning your museum, I beg of you, please, please don't forget them. Their spirits walk those halls, and their bones lay in the earth there, and we remember them. Most of society seems to write us off when they look at the history of New York City and America. But my people were part of New York City long before it was a city as such. Some of them, like my great-grandmother, told us about the Civil War riots when they burned down the old colored orphanage, when Lincoln Hospital, the old building, was for sick and poor slaves. They did laundry, swept chimneys, laid bricks, tarred roofs, and did serve in the army in all the wars and deserve to be remembered. Sincerely, Gina Manuel, Assistant Circulation Manager, Literary Department. P.S. Forgive typos on coffee break.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get back to this. Okay. Um, and so I really love this letter that we have from Gina Manuel, who's a Black New Yorker that was born in Harlem in 1928. But what this letter does is some really important things for setting today's stage for our conversation. And so one of the first things that this letter does is it establishes that Black New Yorkers were fundamental to the development of New York City, particularly from the labor that they performed to the institutions that they created and participated in.
March 6th.
However, what Gina Manuel also does in this letter is that she clearly and powerfully describes the communities that her family had lived in throughout the 19th century, from the Lower East Side along the Bowery to the Tenderloin District, which is present-day Chelsea, to Old San Juan Hill, which is now Lincoln Center. She provides us with a really, really robust sort of details around her family's migration throughout New York City in the 1800s. And right here we have a map that was commissioned in 1939 by Everett Bean, who was a part of the Works Progress Administration, which was a New Deal agency that was started in the 1930s during the Great Depression. And what Everett did was he basically created based on the sort of demographics of the city during the 1800s, he created a map of where Black New Yorkers had lived throughout the 1800s, and he calls it the Trek Northward. And he starts at, in sort of Lower Manhattan, along Wall Street. He talks about the Negro lots, which were along the Bowery. He makes his way up to some settlements that were in what is Old San Juan Hill, like I said, which is now Chelsea, until Black New Yorkers sort of make their way into Harlem during the early 1900s. Um, and so what he really talks about, I mean, and what this sort of visual representation gives us is a sense of the fact that Black New Yorkers are moving around constantly throughout the, one century, throughout the 1800s, right? And that sort of mirrors some of the difficulties when it comes to Black New Yorkers finding housing in New York City at the time, right? And so Black New Yorkers routinely sort of talked about their dismay about the limited amount of housing opportunities that were offered to them during the 1800s, particularly during the 1850s, 60s, and 70s. One Black New Yorker actually shared with a New York Times journalist that we find it so difficult to persuade anyone to rent to us a decent place on account of our color. Hundreds of us would gladly pay twice the rent to live in some more respectable neighborhoods. And although New York City had no explicit law permitting housing discrimination based on race, as it did with segregated schools, landlords and proprietors retained the right to refuse tenants. And as a result, Black New Yorkers were largely confined to neighborhoods like the Five Points and the Eighth Ward. And so today we'll talk more specifically about Lower Manhattan's Eighth Ward. The Eighth Ward is present-day Soho, and it is essentially bounded on the west side along Broadway, the north side along Houston Street, I'm sorry, the east side on Broadway, the north side on Houston Street, the west side along the Hudson River, and south along Canal Street. And so by the mid 1800s, Black New Yorkers were primarily located in Lower Manhattan's Eighth Ward. Um, and so this transition to this neighborhood starts in the 1850s from the Five Points, which is a neighborhood a little bit further south. And Black New Yorkers come to live in this community because native white New Yorkers are interested in moving to a better grade of tenement apartments further uptown. And so Black New Yorkers and Irish immigrants largely moved to this area. And so over the 1850s to the 1870s, there is a sort of creation of this neighborhood as being an undesirable neighborhood, as a community that is filled with groups that people are uninterested in living alongside of. And so white newspapers really do a sort of a job. And when I say white newspapers, I'm talking about the mainstream newspapers at the time, like the New York Daily Herald and the New York Times. They do a really a, a compelling job of painting this neighborhood as one that is filled with crime, vice, and degeneracy. And so that becomes what Lower Manhattan's Ward is known as. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the sort of complexity and the diversity of that neighborhood at the time. And so here is a 1870 census record for a street in Lower Manhattan's Eighth Ward. And I want to talk a little bit about the sort of diversity of the neighborhood at this time, thinking about it as one of the neighborhoods in New York that has the highest concentration of Black New Yorkers. It is a neighborhood that is rich with communal life, businesses, institutions, and even some of its residents, right? And so in this one tenement building alone, which I would say is fairly representative of most tenement apartments in the Eighth Ward that are occupied by Black people. This tenement apartment is largely of Black tenants. All of the tenants are Black, and a little more than half, about 42% of these people were migrants from the South, right? They were coming from states like Maryland, Virginia, and Georgia, most likely during the post-emancipation period once slavery is abolished throughout the entire country. More than a quarter of these people are coming from New York. New York. They don't ask whether New York City or New York State. So these people could undoubtedly be residents and people who were longtime um, dwellers in New York City, like Gina Manuel's family, or they could have been people who've come from different parts of the state and settled in New York City. Then about 20% of these people had come from other northern states, right? Thinking about places like Connecticut and Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Um, about 7.7% of these people are also coming from the French West Indies. So some of these people are coming from places like Saint Domingue, which we now know as Haiti. They're coming from Guadeloupe and Martinique. And then about 3% of these people are coming from the English, the Anglophone West Indies. So places like Jamaica and Trinidad. And so again, to think about some of the robustness of this neighborhood, there were a lot of Black communal businesses and institutions, right? And so despite what mainstream newspapers like the New York Times and the New York Herald wrote about the Eighth Ward as a neighborhood that was filled with crime and degeneracy, there were people like Madam Ann Magnin, who emerges from the pages of Black newspapers like the Weekly Anglo-African, who was a resident of the Eighth Ward. She was an instructor, a teacher. She taught out of her tenement apartment at 154 Sullivan Street, Spanish guitar, singing at her residence. Um, she was such a prolific member of the community that in March of 1860, she actually helped plan a showcase of the students at the Colored Orphan Asylum, which was located in what is now Midtown West. And so she trained these students in singing and recitation, and they performed before an interracial audience to help keep this institution afloat. And so businesswomen like Madam Ann Magnin exemplify the fact that Black people in this neighborhood were adding to their community, that they were living lives that, were that countered what mainstream accounts had provided of them. In addition to people like Madam Ann Magnin, there was actually a prolific school in the neighborhood, which was known as Colored School Number Two. Like I said, in New York City, there was no laws segregating people based on housing, uh, on race. However, people were segregated when it came to schooling facilities. So Colored School Number Two was located in the Eighth Ward on what is now West Broadway. And it was a school that received a lot of praise from institutions like the New York Times, which it shows how they differed from talking about the neighborhood versus the school. And so in 1870, they wrote, "This school is one of the most flourishing for colored children in the country, having the attendance of nearly 300 pupils." Um, and so this institution is also vital in the community. They're providing a lot of access to literacy, to things like mathematics. This picture actually comes from Harper's Weekly, and it shows basically an object teaching class, which we can think of as something that's similar to geometry. This school received some of its highest praises in 1860 when the students are led by the school principal, Sarah Tompkins, in a sort of a musical reenactment of the biblical story of Jesus, in which they're calling attention to the fact that Black people are, although they belong to this sort of universalist Christian brotherhood, Black people are still largely enslaved by their brethren who are white Christians, right? What complicates Black New Yorkers' time in New York City is the draft riots, undoubtedly. And so the draft riots are, they occur in 1863, and basically they occur because white men in New York at the time are uninterested in fighting for the Union cause to abolish slavery. You'll find that a lot of historical accounts and accounts of the time portray the people who are largely tasked or who are largely responsible for the burning, killing, and maiming of Black New Yorkers during the draft riots as Irish immigrants. But further historical study has shown that the sort of numbers of people who are committing the crime, as far as it comes to white New Yorkers, were not just Irish immigrants. They were other people who were native to New York or to America or were born here, people from other parts of Europe as well. But this is something that actually results in about 25% of Black New Yorkers ultimately leaving the city because Black Black people are beat, lynched, maimed, and killed in 1863. And so a quarter of the Black population ultimately leaves New York City and they go to places like Brooklyn, they go to places like Providence, Rhode Island, to Boston, Massachusetts, to Philadelphia, to escape some of that anti-Black violence at the time. And Black New Yorkers, the sort of comment on the city at the time is sort of mixed. Some Black New Yorkers talk about the police aiding them, others talk about the police allowing them to be sort of attacked at the time. The draft riots are ultimately quelled though by federal troops. This was so damning to the Black New York population at the time that the Weekly Anglo-African, the standalone Black newspaper in New York, said, "Come home. We earnestly hope that those of our friends who have sustained losses and who have fled to the country will return immediately to this city, that they may receive immediate aid and reimbursement for such losses." Now, the draft riots happened in 1863, but the story of Lower Manhattan's Eighth Ward unfortunately comes to an end in 1870. And so I want to talk about eminent domain. And so eminent domain is the government's legal power to seize private property for public use, such as building infrastructure like subways, highways, bridges, etc. This project is often used to support urban development and revitalization projects. And so this is not quite like redlining, right? Eminent domain is something different. And this is something that aids in the ultimate destruction and demolition of Lower Manhattan's Eighth Ward, of Lower Manhattan's largest concentration of Black New Yorkers. And so what happens is that in 1868, the city's commissioner for public works decided that it would create a thoroughfare to improve the flow of traffic from Lower Manhattan to Upper Manhattan. And at that time, Upper Manhattan was considered anything that was above 14th Street. And so over a 3-year period, aldermen, proprietors, and residents debated how to widen it and how much to do so, where this thoroughfare would be, which avenue would be along. And so Lawrence Street in 1870 was ultimately decided that it was a street that would be widened, right? And so Lawrence Street would be widened ultimately by 25 feet. And so the committee of the Board of Aldermen declared that not a single class of first grade tenement buildings will be demolished, right? And that ties to why they chose Lawrence Street. Thus, the front of all the houses on the west side from number 1 to number 121 on Lawrence Street were demolished. And one account stated that over 750 Black residents were displaced. And so with them choosing to place the thoroughfare on Lawrence Street where there was not a good grade of tenement housing, right? If you think about the earlier complaint of Black New Yorkers, this was a particular move that was made on the behalf of the city aldermen to create, right, to improve the flow of traffic amongst, people in the city. People of all races need improved traffic, right? But the fact that they chose to have that thoroughfare be on Lawrence Street, which was a street that was largely occupied by Black New Yorkers, talks to the fact how race was undoubtedly a part of these city officials' desire to create, to make this decision ultimately. And so what the city ended up doing is that they paid at least $60,000 to the proprietors of those buildings. And on average, the houses were largely brick. Some of them were rare tenement buildings. They were made of wood, and they were considered to be of an inferior status. And each building would receive anywhere from about $25 to $200 per unit. And that was given to proprietors. And most of the Black tenants in those tenant apartments were not the proprietors. So they didn't even receive any financial compensation for the fact that they were being displaced. And so newspapers were vocal in this sort of street widening, especially as they saw this as the first step in slum clearance. They directly tied value and worth um, to tenement buildings that were not occupied by Black New Yorkers. And so one account from The World, which is a newspaper based in New York, it reads in September of 1870, Rotten Row is no more, the widening of Lawrence Street having utterly demolished it, right? And so again, we can see how the press is thinking about the fact that the street widening has import for improving not just the flow of traffic, but to ultimately get rid of communities and populations that people are uninterested in housing. Right, here's another newspaper article from the New York Herald of August of 1870, which talks about a tenement apartment at number 21 on Lawrence Street, ultimately collapsing, right? And these articles of this nature were published before the street widening even had taken effect in September of 1870, just to validate the fact that this was something that needed to happen, that these tenements along Lawrence Street were dilapidated and of the worst grade. And so these articles sort of sensationalizing things that are happening was just used as a tactic to um, affirm city planners' of desires to that Lawrence Street had to be cleared out and that these tenements had to ultimately be demolished. And I just want to give us some other examples of this really quickly that have occurred throughout the 19th century. Another example of this sort of use of eminent domain to improve the city is Seneca Village, which was a Black enclave that was further uptown, that was created in 1825. So they're celebrating their bicentennial this year. And the neighborhood was created by Black proprietors who were interested in living in not in the sort of crowdedness of Lower Manhattan at the time. They wanted like a life that was sort of predicated on the idea that you had access to the city, but you also had a sort of more rural or agrarian lifestyle. And ultimately, in the 1850s, when city officials wanted to create Central Park, this neighborhood was ultimately demolished so that the city could create Central Park. Right, and here's a newspaper article talking about between 59th and 106th Street from 5th Avenue to 8th Avenue, the fact that they are interested in planning and creating a park and that the lands will be seized. And so other examples of eminent domain in New York City that even have impacted Black New Yorkers that extend beyond the 19th century. I focus this just for a level of specificity on the 19th century, on Lower Manhattan's 8th Ward, but there are other communities in which Black New Yorkers have experienced this. San Juan Hill, for instance, which is now Lincoln Center in the 1950s. There's been so much use of eminent domain by Columbia University as they have expanded their campus and their footprint in the West Harlem area throughout the early 2000s and even up until this day. The construction of the Barclays Center in Brooklyn has ultimately affected the neighborhood of Prospect Heights, particularly its Black residents in the early 2010s, and it continues to do so today. And so I just want to leave you all here with the story of the 8th Ward reveals how Black New Yorkers built vibrant communities despite persistent racial exclusion and housing discrimination. Yet through the tools like eminent domain, the city actively facilitated their displacement, clearing space for the development of the city while erasing people who had lived there and considered these neighborhoods home. This history challenges us to confront how urban planning and policy have long been used to reshape New York in ways that marginalize Black people under the guise of progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I just got lost in listening and I forgot to, I was like, oh, I have to now host. Thank you so much for this history lesson. I think I'm curious, I have questions, but I'll just first reach out to Operations Manager Ro Owen. If you could message me and let me know if anyone has questions. The floor is now open for 15-minute Q&A session. So if you haven't already, please place your question. Please state that you have a question to Interim Operations Manager Ro Owen, and then we'll call your name so that you can ask your question. Remember that because this is a public hearing, you need to be on camera and unmuted to ask your question. And then note that testimony comes after this. This is not the time to ask questions for or make a statement about your thoughts on reparations, but it's specifically to ask questions for our educational speaker. So I'll just see, let me just check the chat here. Okay, so we have a question from Ernest Russell. So if you could please unmute and come on to camera so that you can ask Mr. Taylor your question.
All right. Good morning. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
All right. So my question for Marquise was, what are some reparative justice initiatives that you believe would be adequate to address this history that you just presented upon? And then I had a second question after that, but definitely wanted to get your feedback on that first one.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Where I'm at, I mean, we just had like all these fire trucks just pass by. So I heard a little bit of it, but could you ask it one more time?
Yep, just got
Okay.
unmuted. The question was, what are some reparative justice initiatives that you believe would be adequate to address this history that you just presented upon? And I had like a second half, which is more so, um, what is owed to the descendants of enslaved persons based on this history in your assessment, so.
Yeah, so I mean, I can kind of combine the two questions because I think in a lot of ways that they're similar. So I'll start with this A, right, for the historic part of it, right, for the fact that these neighborhoods have existed and that they no longer exist because of this, the role that the city has played. I think that there should be something that commemorates this or memorializes this, that talks about the fact that Black New Yorkers had lived there, right? So we're thinking about things like maybe plaques, monuments, things that really talk to the fact that Black New Yorkers were a part of the city, and lived in certain neighborhoods, right? And so I'll give you just a small little sort of anecdote, but I had gone to high school in the Chelsea Vocational High School building, which is in Soho. So it's between like Spring Street and Avenue of the Americas. And so I went to high school where the Eighth Ward was. And I'm going to be honest with you, I went to a high school that was predominantly, the Black students were in the minority. Soho, what we know Soho to look like today, is a neighborhood that is not occupied largely by Black people in New York. I think I would have had a different time or experience in that community had I known that there at one point it was a Black neighborhood. There were things like a small plaque to commemorate the fact that there was a Black public school that had contributed so much to Black New Yorkers. So I do think that there are things like that that need to happen as far as the historic, that are reparative. I think also too, when we think about New York City, like education curricula, there needs to be more emphasis on the fact that Black people are a part of the city's history. And I think that what that then does is then bring us into the more contemporary, right? And so bringing us into the contemporary to say, what does it, descendants of these communities, what are they owed, right? And so I'm going to be honest with you. I think that there there needs to be some sort of obviously redress, but maybe even compensation to allow to really remedy the fact that so much of Black New Yorkers' experience in the city have been shaped by the fact that we've not been able to have access to capital in the same way that other people have had. Therefore, we cannot create the sort of lines of wealth. And so, and I'm not an economist now, this is where I would work alongside economists, but something to really remedy the fact that we don't have as much capital and that we are limited in those ways, right? So I hope that answers your question, Ernest. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Brooke, no last name. Brooke, when you come on camera and unmute, can you please say your full name for the public record? Thank you. Sorry, Brooke, we can't hear you. I think it's on your computer end, your input.
Lean.
Yes, there you are. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, my name is Brooke, last name Lean. And my question is, where did you get the number of 7% of Black people that weren't Native or descendants of American slavery moving to New York? That is a very high number. Where did you get that 7%?
Oh, okay. It wasn't allowing me to unmute. Now I can unmute. So that figure actually came from, right, and it was for one particular tenement apartment in New York City that I was saying is representative of others in the area, right? And so at this time in New York City, right, and that comes from the 1870s, there are a lot of people who are immigrating to New York at this time, right? And so we have a lot of different migrations that are happening to New York City at this time throughout the 19th century. The first being the earliest is a people from Saint-Domingue and other French Isles, right? And so once the Haitian Revolution is underway in the 1700s, like 1790s, we start to see early migrations of these people to New York City, right? They're coming here in a multitude of ways, right? The racial caste system in places like the French Caribbean, a little bit more complex than in America. So you have some groups of people, and they call these groups immigrants, right? Some of these people are Black people who are property owning Black people who are concerned that they will be ultimately murdered in the Haitian Revolution because although they're Black, they are property owning and they might also own enslaved people. And then you also have a group of people who are coming here with their enslavers, Black people with their enslavers. You also have once slavery is now later, right? And so those are people that are coming from Saint-Domingue, which is Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe. Then all throughout the 1800s, even up until slavery is abolished across the country with the 13th Amendment in 1865, you have people that are coming from places like Jamaica to New York. There is an example of a Black physician whose name is James N. Fenwick. He was a physician in Soho, what is now Soho in the 8th Ward. He comes to America in 1865. And so he's one of those people that are adding to this community, this Black community of New Yorkers who are composed of both native-born Black Americans who have roots in New York State or other parts of the North, who have roots in the South maybe, and have come to New York, who have ultimately immigrated here from places in the Caribbean as well. So where's that number coming from? So that number, yeah. So that number is from a census record, right? So okay, I can't hear you. Yeah, you're mute.
I'm very aware of the history and how
Uh-huh.
Haitians that owned slaves came over here and then owned slaves in Louisiana. So I'm very aware of that history. My question is that 7% sounds very, very high. And I want to know where exactly did you get 7% of Black immigration at that in the 1900s?
No. And that's not the number for Black immigrants. That's the number of people who are living in a tenement apartment and where they're coming from. So what I did was that I took a tenement apartment, one in particular, right? And then I'm also looking at where people are coming from. And this is where people are telling the census enumerator that they've come from. So yeah, so the number is right. And so like, let's say that building is composed of people it's 30 people, right? One of them coming would be 3%, right? And that's how I got the number. So it was from a tenement apartment. And I'm making the argument that this could also be represented, and it's replicated in other tenement apartments in New York at the time when you look at the census data from 1870, that this is where people are coming from. There's no statistic that talks about, you don't get that from Ellis Island or Castle Garden that talks about the exact figure of Black people who are immigrating to this country at this time. They have a sense of, based on the sort of incomplete records that they have, but there's no exact number. So I wouldn't even try to give you a number saying that 7% have come or immigrated to the United States. That was the amount of people who were in a tenement apartment and where they were coming from.
Thanks for that clarification, Mr. Taylor. Are there any other folks that want to ask questions and have put that into the chat? Operations Manager Owen.
I'm sorry, those are the only two questions
Okay.
we have. We have one more question from Ernest Russell, if time permits.
Sure.
All right. So I guess my third question here is just going to be a follow-up of what Brooke was asking. And so I guess around the 1880s or even the Civil Rights era, we understand that there were Black immigrants that made their way to New York City, et cetera. What is the estimate number that you see out there as it relates to that specific population group? I know rough estimates say less than 5%, but just wondering if you had come across any research or data in your your historic findings or searchings?
Yeah, I haven't come across any specific figure because the thing is with Castle, and so this is the thing, during the 1800s, people who are immigrating to the United States are coming from largely a few places, right? And so Castle Garden being one of them and Ellis Island being another one. And so those institutions for this time period, right, because of the fact that, and also another thing, immigration doesn't really become like sort of structuralized at the federal level until the abolition of slavery. So there's a lot of actually really interesting discourse that talks about the abolition of slavery, right, the erosion of it, and then also the fact that the United States has stronger immigration policy. So those people from those time periods, right, Castle Garden and Ellis Island, are not able to provide us with a sense of how many people are coming to New York. But I think what is interesting and how we can get a sense, or we know the fact that there are people who were immigrating at this time, is there are census records like the 1870 census records that ask one of the categories whether someone has immigrated here or and how long that they have been here. So that's how I know like about that physician, right? That Dr. James M. Fenwick, that he came to New York in 1865 and that he was coming from one of the, and it says, the English West Indies, right? So that could be like Jamaica, that could be a few places, right? And so that's how we're able to verify the fact that people, at least when they are talking to census enumerators, are allowing us to know that they have immigrated here. And so I would say, I mean, it's not a perfect model, but like when you look at and so some of the tenements that I've looked at in Lower Manhattan from that time period, the figures sort of match up, right? Like as far as in a tenement apartment, it would largely be composed of, in the 1870s, of people who are Southern born, right? And so, and that's what the figure I provided showed, right? That most of the people, about half of them are coming from the South, and that about a quarter of them are from New York. We don't know if it's New York City or New York State because it just says New York. And that about, I'm going to say 10% of these people have immigrated here. Whether that be from the French West Indies or the Anglophone West Indies, they've ultimately left here. And yeah, and I would say about another quarter of these people, 20% to a quarter of them, have come from other free states in the North, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, more so, I think you said it wasn't a precise figure there as far as total estimates, just due to the way that, the ending of slavery and the way that the metrics were being tracked at that time. But you mentioned that there were some boxes and things like that to identify. So, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And Mr. Russell, we have another question for, oh, Judy Smith just said, never mind. Did anyone else have a question for Mr. Taylor? Oh, Judy Smith, you missed. Okay. Copy that. Does anyone else have a question for Mr. Taylor? While I'm giving.
We have one more question from Brooke, if she can come on. So.
Okay, great. One more question.
Oh, they're not gonna let me ask.
You're on, Brooke. We just need your screen, your camera to come on. We can hear you.
Me?
Yep. Do you have another question?
I do, but okay, sorry. No, but it's not letting me undo my camera. I'm clicking it. Okay, there it is. Okay, so my question is, when you did speak about the fact that some of the Black immigration the immigration of you called it French West Indies, were slave owners, and they are also considered Black. Do you think that they should qualify for reparations just like the rest of us?
Okay, I'm off mute now. So I didn't say whether or not I think that they deserve reparations, but to answer your question, so when these people ultimately got to the United States and they came to a place like New York, those people were no longer able to own slaves. And the reason why is because laws around enslavement have changed in New York. Right. So the laws of which, like in a French system, they were not quite applicable here. And by and large, most of the people that were coming here in New York starting in the 1790s, a lot of them were actually coming here as enslaved people with their enslavers. But I'm not gonna deny the fact that I'm sure in that number, because we do know that there was a class of people like the petite bourgeoisie who owned enslaved people in places like Saint Domingue. I'm sure they made their way here, but they were not able to. And I'm talking about in this city, maybe like in a place like New Orleans, I'm not sure, were able to own slaves.
Thank
They
you.
did. They did own slaves and
In New York?
this is the
Oh,
Sorry, Brooke, we have only 10 minutes left and two new people who haven't had a chance to ask questions. We'd like to give them that opportunity. We have Jomo Akono and then Keisha Forrester. You'll be next after Jomo Akono. Jomo Akono, I see, is already on camera, so off to your question for Mr. Taylor. Thank you.
All right, beautiful. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I just want to ask, in reference to some of the, I think the 3 or 4 major land plots that were identified as you gave the examples, have you thought of, if we were to have any sort of reparatory process, if moving forward, maybe like some sort of land use tax might be something that could be utilized to help compensate and repair of lost and continued use, because it's not like those properties are going to get returned back to the original inhabitants, but the wealth loss and the potential value concurrently, I think is where we really getting into reparations. And I was just wondering if you had put any thought to how a remedy could be approached legally, legislatively, and practically.
and
Thank you.
practically. Thank you. And thank you so much for your question and your comment. The thing, so I gonna be honest with you, as far as I'm a person who shares a commitment like all of you, I do think that there needs to be some sort of reparative, there needs to be some reparations. I know that the ways in which I have thought about them, I'm not savvy enough to know the sort of economics behind it, but I mean, that sounds like something that is that needs to be done, because I do believe that whatever it should be is that there should be some sort of, because of the fact that we were denied access to capital and all this type of wealth building and acquisition, that there should be something where we're able to benefit in that way. And I think one of the great things about this commission is that they have invited also alongside historians, economists, sociologists, people that are able to, who have a little bit more of this sort of bandwidth than I do when it comes to what that might look like. Because I mean, some of the stuff that I'll advocate for immediately that I know in my wheelhouse that we do as historians when it comes to the reparative stuff is the sort of honorific stuff. It's the plaques, it's the monuments, all that stuff, which I think is important. But I also know that what we need is deeply something that's concerned with capital and revenue and fixing our sort of plight that has been caused by denied access to housing, denied access to building wealth, denied access to sort of communal institutions. What we don't even talk about is the fact that Black New Yorkers, when we think about colored school number 2, that was in Soho, the Board of Education would not really finance. I mean, they were financing it like a little bit of money, but Black New Yorkers are largely financing that. They're putting their money into it through Black churches. And then once we're ultimately removed from that neighborhood, what even happens to that type of sort of, wealth that we built, right? To even be able to buy a school or to buy a church in Lower Manhattan, right? So I do think that what we need is something that's deeply going to remedy our financial plight. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And then our last question will be from Keisha Forrester, already on camera. And let's get you unmuted for your question for Mr. Taylor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor. Thank you for that piece. My question is, can you tell us what were the criteria given to you by the commission for this historical piece? The reason I'm asking that is that because in areas such as Lower Manhattan, you had well-to-do Black folk who were living in hiding, if you will, or not acknowledging their Blackness, persons like famed librarian Belle DeCosta Green. Would those persons be included in your numbers as well? Thank you.
Thank you. So that is a really, really, really good question. So I'm going to start off with the sort of guidelines from the commission. I was invited to talk about, to have a conversation with you all along the lines of something that talks about sort of like histories of redlining, right? Sort of anti-Blackness within policy. That was the sort of broad ask. And I decided to have this conversation on Lower Manhattan on the 8th Ward. I think that, I mean, I could have did on Seneca Village, I could have did on other stuff. I do think that I think there's more interest in Seneca Village. There's been like a New York Times article. I think that we're still trying to understand this Lower Manhattan area. So that was the first thing. And then the second part of your question. So are you asking about people who have decided to pass for white? Okay. So the people who have decided to pass for white, are they a part of the sort of capturing of the sort of presentation that I was able to provide? Um, it's kind of, I would say it's complicated, right? So, I mean, when it comes to the figures that I'm pulling, right, from people that are living in tenement dwellings, I'm going off what people are identifying as or what the census enumerators are identifying as. So I can't do the mundane task of like going through all these people, because what I will say is at this time in New York, especially in the 8th Ward, there are a lot of Black people and Irish people intermarrying, forming community, forming marriages, having children. So there are a lot of people that eventually pass for white in my research, right? So I talked about the guy, James N. Fenwick. He was a Black physician in Lower Manhattan in Soho. His son becomes one of the first graduates, or not the first, an early graduate of NYU Law. He passes for white. His grandson, Buddy DeCosta, not Buddy DeCosta, I'm sorry, that's thinking about DeCosta that you brought up. Buddy DeSilva, his grandson starts Capitol Records in Los Angeles and passes for white. So there are people that I have, in doing my research, have noticed that they do pass. But when I created this presentation, I was dealing largely with people who identify as Black people. But you are right to note that there are people who are well-to-do and who are passing in New York City at this time. And I think what it does more than anything, it reaffirms how people in this, even in this place of cultural diversity and cosmopolitanism, shows how strong anti-Blackness is, that they have to pass for white, that they know that they won't have the same success because they are Black. And so we can look at people like Bella DeCosta, who comes a little later, because I think Bella was born in like the 1880s. But I mean, we're still talking about the same politics around race and racism that make Black people vulnerable. You have a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. We only have 3 minutes left. And
Sorry. The reason
Oh, you're muted.
yeah, so we're gonna, in the interest of time, make sure that we leave space so that we have the full time we planned for public testimony. So if your comment, if you'd like to make your comment during the public testimony portion, that would also be great. Really appreciative to Mr. Taylor, very much appreciative of your offering really just a history that I think many people are unaware of in New York, specifically in New York City. Thinking of Soho as a historically Black neighborhood, I think is a first for a lot of folks. So I would recommend that folks check out the Tenement Museum. In addition to 1869's Union of Hope tour, there's also the Reclaiming Black Spaces tour, where, like Mr. Taylor said, there's lots of areas that he could have spoken about. And he, in order to give a rich story and understanding, focused on one area. But I've learned from, one of the tours at Tenement Museum in the 1600s, that the Dutch, when they were enslaving, there was actually an area of Manhattan that was for quote unquote half-free Black folks to own land. And so that's a whole interesting conversation that we don't have bandwidth for. We're actually going to move to break now. And thank you big time to Mr. Taylor for giving us such a rich opportunity to learn. You're obviously welcome to stay on and hear public comment and testimony. Just as a reminder, so it'll be a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 12:05, where we'll begin public testimony portion of the hearing. If you haven't signed up to speak and you wish to do so, please message Operations Manager Ro Owen. The first 3 people that are up to speak are Kathy Dean, Tom Bulger and Judy Smith. And just before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge Senator James Sanders Jr. has joined. And so when we come back from break, we'll get an opportunity to offer some brief remarks from the senator. So everyone, we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Welcome back, everyone. We are going to pause here just before public comment. Senator James Sanders Jr., if you're still on and you wanted to offer any brief remarks, we would love to hear from you. We'll have you come on camera and off mute if you're available.
Greetings all. I trust you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Greetings to the commission and Godspeed in your historic work. Continue, see this one through. The weight of history is on you, but I believe that you're up to it. I want to remind people of the charge of the state legislature here. Sooner or later, the commission will make its rulings. The first ruling has to be, is there grounds for reparations? Is there cause? Is there grounds? And assuming that they say yes, and they do have the ability to say no, assuming that they say yes, then the next is, what does reparations look like? And what quantifiable, how much, what combination of whatever they decide it should look like. Then it goes to the legislature. In the legislature, my friends, we are interested in the harm done by New York State. Our focus will not be the harm by Britain or by Britain in the transatlantic to Nigeria, what we now know as Nigeria, or even Georgia or South Carolina. That is not what we're looking at. We are looking at the harms done by either commission or omission in New York State. Either what did the state do against these people, or what protections should the state have offered that wasn't offered? Those are the two things that we are looking for. So the more concrete your analysis, the more quantifiable, the more New York State, the better for this purpose. Having said that, I'm learning so much from the other speakers and very much interested in this process. If there are no questions for me, I will stop.
You, Senator Sanders.
Thank you.
Good to hear from you, and thanks for reminding folks of the legislation. So I dropped in the chat the link to the legislation so folks can familiarize themselves with the task and really to understand the process. Again, the commission doesn't make reparations, it makes recommendations to the people, the elected officials, the people that New Yorkers have voted in. So the people that you have voted for are who will be advancing or not advancing certain recommendations. So that said, we have our first lineup. Kathy Dean. I'll just remind everyone of the first three. Kathy Dean is number 1. Number 2 is Tom Bulger, and number 3 is Judy Smith. Kathy Dean, if you could please come on camera and off mute so that you can provide your 3 minutes of testimony. Just a reminder that folks should please look at the top right of your screen for the timer. Everyone should extend to each speaker the same respect that they expect to receive. This includes respecting the allotted time to speak. So when your 3 minutes have elapsed, you'll hear that closing Oscars music. You can also see that time counting down, as I said, at the top right, so you'll know that your time is going to be finishing soon. Please finish your testimony if you haven't already when you hear that music. To respect everyone's time to share, we will mute speakers who go over their allotted time. If your testimony is longer than 3 minutes, that is totally expected and natural. Please feel welcome to submit your written testimony online or leave the voicemail. Again, please listen for your name and be ready to be on camera and unmuted. If your name is called and you're not ready at that time, we will move on to the next speaker. If there's time after all the others have commented, then we'll circle back to anyone who stepped away but initially indicated that they wanted to publicly share their testimony. Just a reminder, you'll have 3 minutes. So Kathy Dean, are you here and ready?
Seems like she may have left, so we can
Okay.
move on.
We'll circle back. Tom Bulger, you're number 2. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm reminded of Ida B. Wells saying that to right a wrong, shine the light of truth upon it. And you see from comments when people are talking about reparations, there's a whole lot of people that think we're inventing the wheel. And the truth is that in countries like Aotearoa, New Zealand, there have been reparations. Reparations have been provided to the American nations, the indigenous people, the First Nations. We're not inventing the wheel. And if we shine a flashlight on it, and we're kind of navel gazing, it's not going to be as successful, I don't think, as if we have kind of a world audience of what goes on here in New York. If we considered inviting somebody who's very steeped in restorative justice, like a Maori judge, for example, from Aotearoa, or somebody from the United Nations who's used to dealing with restorative justice, I think it helps to have the white people in New York who think that this is not the done thing to realize it's a question of self-respect, and that just for our own sake, then white people need to be able to feel as though they've done right, that they have righted a wrong. Thank you very much for all you're doing. And again, thank you to Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Bulger. Our next speaker is Judy Smith.
You can see me? Oh yeah, okay. Hi everyone. I want to thank Mr. Taylor, and I agree with what he said. It's time for I say the Americans of color to start building wealth. And I was a little confused because I'm trying to understand, is this reparations for the descendants of the American slaves only? Or is this for anybody that identifies as Black? I got the answer in the chat that it's for both, which to me makes it harder to remedy when you're mixing everyone in because they identify as Black, no matter where they come from. That's confusing to me. But I want to say that reparations is not just about slavery. It's about Jim Crow. It's about all the discrimination that we face even after Jim Crow, the disenfranchisement. We weren't allowed to be educated in the same way and have knowledge of building wealth and our capacity for jobs was limited. And so I think reparations should be to remedy that. And it doesn't just have to be in terms of money. It can be in terms of land, in terms of property. I live in NYCCCRR, and NYCCCRR wants to privatize our apartments and turn them over to private landlords. And some of us have been here 30, 40, 50 years. So why can't they offer those who qualify our apartments as reparations? Because that would be a way that we can start to build wealth. And there should be restrictions on reparations, because if you're on drugs and you're in jail and you're not doing the right thing, then you are not entitled to reparation.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Sorry, your time, 3 minutes has elapsed. So please submit the rest of your testimony either via voicemail or email. I'll bring that slide up at the end to remind everyone of where and how. Ernest Russell, you are up next for 3 minutes of testimony. It looks like maybe Ernest, you stepped away. All right, we will circle back. Next up is Keisha Forrester, and then after that will be Jomo Akono. So Keisha Forrester, you're up next to offer testimony. Thank you.
Hey, McKinney, I'm back. I was just stepped away quickly. Can I give my testimony, McKinney, or do you want me to?
Yes, Keisha Forrester, you'll be up after. Is that
All right.
okay? Thanks.
So I like what the presenter covered, because I think he really took a deep dive into like some of the Civil War history of New York, as well as some of its other key elements and the impacts that it has had overwhelmingly on the descendants of enslaved persons here in the United States. I do want to kind of echo the comments of the gentleman who spoke earlier about shining the light on this topic or on this issue. And the way I want to do it is quote two figures. So first one is Frederick Douglass, where he says, "I expose slavery in this country because to expose it is to kill it. Slavery is one of those monsters of darkness to whom the light of truth is death. Let the light be turned on New York." And in the next quote that I want to state, it's David Ruggles. And he says, "The laws of New York are framed to make every colored man a slave unless he can prove himself free." I think when we think about the story of descendants in the state of New York, as well as in the city of New York, it is, like other states, the story of injustice. And so to Senator Sanders Jr., if the commission does not recommend reparations or reparatory justice, I know that they have the option to say that, hey, maybe no justice is owed. If they chose to go that route, I would say it would be a fraudulent commission. And I think the only reason why I would say that is because the history in New York is clear that from a wealth perspective, education perspective, as well as even normal day-to-day civilian treatment, that injustice has been done upon the descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. And it is with that hope, or it is with that statement, that I hope New York does the right thing when it comes to this process of justice, healing, and reconciliation in its within its borders. And so with that, I would just like to end like I always end, which is advocating for lineage-specific solutions, that seek to truly heal and provide redress to this community who has long been denied justice in their nation of birth. And with that, I'm complete.
Thank you, Mr. Russell, and coming in under time. All right, so we'll go back to Keisha Forrester. You're up next, please. And then actually after that, Jomo Okono and then Brooklyn.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And on behalf of foundational Black Americans, descendants of those who were enslaved right here in New York, I affirm that reparations must be reserved exclusively for foundational Black Americans whose ancestors endured centuries of state-sanctioned enslavement, exploitation, and racial terrors. Those racial terrors equate to free Black people who were kidnapped and sold into slavery. We must repair that, no matter the circumstances of their descendants. When reparations are discussed, as it relates to unique lineage of American descendants of slavery, it is diluted in broad terms when you use things like African descent or people of color. A debt is owed right here. It's not symbolic, it's not global, but it is specific. It is unpaid wages for stolen labor and the destroyed lives of men, women, and children. And so we have to keep that in perspective. We cannot continue to allow others to grandfather themselves onto the enslavement, even if they came from slave colonies in other lands, whether it be Jamaica, Haiti, or wherever. You need to petition the British and the French for that. And I want to make it plain here that stay out of our reparations claims. It has nothing to do with you. And so I asked and I implored the commission to keep it specific to foundational Black Americans. And anything other than that would be unjust and, in my humble opinion, make you co-conspirators in our unjust claim here. So that is my time, and I yield there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Forrester, also coming in under time. Next up is Jomo Okono.
All right, yes, just real quickly, just to revisit a couple points. One is I am definitely under the mind and the knowledge that we are going to have to be mindful of addressing the issue of lost wages, unpaid and missed generational wealth as a result of those who have been here, depending upon marked times, whether they were the ones who were originally enslaved, whether they were the ones who were brought here even in cross America exchange. And also, there are many people, I don't know if everyone is aware of the history, that were brought here throughout different times, even from other countries that were subject to the same conditions. So I understand the many realities, and I would really just honestly and lovingly suggest that for those who have the idea to focus on only the Africans who were enslaved at one time in America, I would suggest to make those remedies so that that part of the legislation can be addressed. That does not preclude you from putting the information there. And I think that the best energy can be used to create solutions for that aspect. And then there are other areas of legislation that are addressed for other times that those who are on that mantra, they should be working on that. So I don't really per se see it as an either or. I see it as go for what you know. If your spirit move you, then put the research and energy behind it to address it. Because the legislation is the legislation. So I think that we should follow what is legislated. The other aspect is that I want to approach something that has not really been addressed many times, and I think that it should be included. And I have a solution, a proposed solution. And how much did it cost for us to lose our cultural continuity? Because every time you're removed, every time you're disenfranchised, every time you are destabilized with finances, your cultural continuity is lost as well, based upon even the oppressive behaviors and the rules of enslavement, and all of the isms that have followed. And I believe that one of the most important things that we could do is allocate funding for education as well as even travel and transportation. If people want to decide that I came from East Africa, West Africa, or wherever, or you were even Indigenous American, and these are what our traditions were, we need to restudy them. I believe that funding for re-education, BC, before captivity, or before, colonization, whichever BC you want to use. But all of us have been impacted culturally. And, honestly speaking, it's almost like we're functioning out of our right minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Jomo Okono. Up next, we'll have Brooklyn and then Moade or Moad Jagusa. I apologize if, please correct my pronunciation when you come on. Brooklyn, you're up next.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. I'm grateful the speaker today addressed the complex and often overlooked nuances of Black immigration. At one point, that stood out in history of Haitian French colonial collaborators, individuals who enslaved people in both Haiti and Louisiana, yet today are broadly categorized as Black, including such groups as in reparations meant for the descendants of American chattel slavery is not just inaccurate, it's unjust. Reparations are not a blanket gesture. They are specific targeted cash remedy compensation for labor stolen and suffered and endured under U.S. chattel slavery. Additional hardships, while real, must be addressed separately. Oh, Lord. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Oh gosh. Separately, reparations must remain rooted in lineage and historical accountability. The speaker also mentioned Irish immigrants who once lived alongside freemen, but where are they now? The Irish rioted to make sure they let white America know they had no camaraderie with us. They've been absorbed into whiteness, benefiting from its privileges, while the descendants of freedmen remain marginalized. Oh my gosh, it keeps losing my place. Remain marginalized. We have also experienced this from other immigrant groups that have come here and have also been absorbed into whiteness or receiving white privileges. If we are serious about historical truth, let's hold a hearing that examines how immigration has impacted foundational Black Americans. Too often, other groups benefit from our movements, ride the wave of our struggle, and then move on, leaving our communities behind. Let's protect the integrity of our fight. Reparations are not just symbolic, they are justice, and they are for the freedmen of the U.S. American system. Thank you.
Thank you. Also coming in under time. Up next, we have Moade or Moad Jagusa. Again, I apologize. Please correct my pronunciation. Thank you.
Hello, can you see me?
We can see you and hear you.
Awesome. So my name is Moade Jagusa. I am a Nigerian American. My comment here is that I believe that all of the reparations discussions so far have been talking about things that have happened in the past. I believe that African Americans are owed reparations for ongoing harm that is still continuing today in New York State. I have a friend who is an African American in Syracuse, New York, and who has had 4 out of her 8 siblings murdered or died due to drugs and poison. And just to have that many of your siblings or your family to be murdered and to have the cops not investigate or continue to fail to investigate over and over again in this day of 2024 is just absolutely genocidal. And I do believe there's an ongoing genocide that is happening, at least an ongoing ethnic cleansing that is happening when it comes to the mass displacement of people from the south side of Syracuse, New York. And I also know that these conditions are similar to conditions that are happening in Buffalo, New York, and other parts of upstate New York, such as Albany, and in New York City as well. And so I believe that you guys cannot ignore displacement that is ongoing, genocide that is ongoing, mass killings, mass death that is ongoing, and also the Onondaga County justice system has a 98% felony plea deal conviction rate. And so what that means is that only 2% of people who are actually accused of and then found guilty of felonies in Onondaga County are doing so through a trial. The vast majority of people are pleading guilty because they're threatened with these crazy threats in order to plead guilty to things that they didn't even do. So I think that the Reparations Commission has to take that into account and don't ignore what's happening to African Americans today, because what's happening today is also quite severe. Even when we're talking about what was happening in the past, there's still enslavement essentially happening. There's still people being paid 30 cents or 10 cents an hour at these jails. And the governor knows this. Kathy Hochul is putting down these riots in these jails as if this is nothing. So this commission, to be honest, is farcical from the beginning, because you guys aren't even addressing what's happening to African Americans in your own cities right now. But yeah, I'm a Nigerian American, so my stake in this is through my friends, not myself, and I believe that reparations for non-African Americans should be a separate issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Also coming in under time. I think we can circle back now to Kathy Dean. I see you're already on camera.
Thank you for letting me speak. Okay. Honorable members of the New York State Community Reparations Commission, my name is Kathy Dean, and I stand before you today as a direct present-day descendant of two freedmen, Hill Cherry Sr. and Hill Cherry Jr., also known as Hill Gillum, who served bravely in the 14th Regiment of the United States Colored Heavy Artillery during the Civil War. As a global war on terrorism disabled veteran, their legacy resonates deeply with me. New York State's historical records show that 40 men, including my ancestors, were enlisted to meet the state's wartime quotas. Organizations like the Union League of New York were instrumental in recruiting Black soldiers, leading to the formation of the 20th, 26th, and 31st United States Colored Infantry. Frederick Douglass, in his 1863 speech, Men of Color to Arms, said it best. Once let the Black man get upon his person the brass letter US, let him get an eagle on his button and a musket on his shoulder and bullets in his pocket, and there is no power on earth which can deny that he has earned the right of citizenship. Despite their invaluable contributions, many of these soldiers never received the recognition or the bounties they were promised. What I would like to speak about specifically is the disaggregation bill, Assembly Bill A6341 and Senate Bill S7664, created by the Freedmen Project. Disaggregation means breaking down broad racial categories like Black into specific groups such as African American / freedmen, Jamaican, Nigerian, Haitian, and so on. This gives us accurate data on the distinct condition each group faces. Why does this matter? Because policy must be based on precision. Disaggregated data allows lawmakers to target housing, education, healthcare, and other vital resources where they are truly needed. It supports reparations because you cannot repair what you don't measure. Disaggregated data proves the necessity for lineage-based reparation policies. And it's already happened for others, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and the Middle Eastern North African communities already benefit from state-level disaggregation. Foundational Black Americans deserve the same.
Thank you, Kathy Dean. Your 3 minutes has elapsed. Please, it looks like you have something written, so please be sure to submit that via email. We don't have anyone else signed up to offer public comment, so public comment is now closed. We want to thank everyone who participated, Mr. Taylor and those community members who shared testimony. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. If you would like to submit additional or longer testimony, if you didn't get to testify today, if your testimony wasn't able to be completed, please email your testimony to reparationscommission@reparations.ny.gov, as you can see on the slide. The insights, experiences, and recommendations shared today will influence the Commission's ongoing work and final recommendations. As Executive Director, I've analyzed the testimonies of the first 11 public hearings and shared that synthesis with the Commissioners for their review and consideration. And of course, all the hearings are recorded and freely available on the Commission website. For those interested in following the Commission's progress or providing additional input, information is available on the website at ny.gov/reparations. And thanks to the efforts of our new Executive Commission Assistant, Ms. Adwar, and the Office of General Services digital team, you'll soon be able to sign up to receive update emails directly from the Commission. Next week, on the 18th of September, the Commission will hold an in-person hearing in Ithaca at the Ithaca Downtown Conference Center. So please visit ny.gov/reparations for more information. We'll see you all there. Thank you again for your participation and commitment to the work of communal abundance. This hearing is now adjourned.